All right. Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you here with us. And thank you so much for bearing with us through some technical challenges this morning. For some reason, our webinar account license was gone this morning. So we had to change Zoom rooms real quick. So appreciate your patience through that and really excited to have you here with us for what I think is going to be a great conversation. Hard to believe that it is already September. We are starting another academic year and another great season of Coffee and Conversations. And I am thrilled to be joined by my colleagues, Michele Holt-Shannon, who is the co-founder and the director of New Hampshire Listens. And we will also be seeing Dr. Carrie Portrie, who is a program manager with New Hampshire Listens. So the way that the format is going to work here is that we are going to have a presentation for the first half of the event, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat area, and I'll be able to ask any questions as they come up. That's how we're going to manage this. And so without further ado, welcome, and let me pull up this PowerPoint.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit, and then, like Jordan said, Carrie is going to be joining us, Dr. Carrie Portrie, and in classic style, on first days of school, she is stuck in first day of school traffic. So she'll be here any minute, but I'm going to get us going and start the conversation. So my name is Michele Holt-Shannon. I'm a founder and director of New Hampshire Listens, and we turned 11 in May, and have just had a lot of experience having dialogues personally, at work, in communities, in the middle of really big controversies. And so wanted to just share some of our lessons learned, some of the tips that we've gathered along the way with all of you today, and really looking forward to your questions. I am a middle child. I come from a very mixed politics family. And so some of these stories that we'll tell will kind of be everything from sort of, me talking to my brother to, dealing with, protests and trying to help folks navigate a really controversial moment in a community. And when Carrie comes on, we'll have her introduce herself as well. But let me just first, for those of you who aren't familiar with New Hampshire Listens, just a couple of things about us. Our mission is to help New Hampshire residents talk and listen and act together so that communities will work for everyone. This is the next slide, Jordan. And our vision really is that, residents are more connected, more engaged, that they are heard in the decisions that impact their lives, and where there's equitable access to justice, to opportunity, and to liberty. So it's a broad mission, a broad vision, but we work at it every day in little ways, and look forward to sharing more about that. In the next slide, I just want to share that there's sort of these areas of our work over the years that we've sort of gotten better at naming. And one of them is just that, we work with local communities. So we have a lot of resources for local people who want to increase engagement in their community. We do some research. Most of that research is on civic health and civic life and participatory democracy. So deeper democratic principles in local public life. We have learning exchanges on everything from lead poisoning, people who are, fighting lead poisoning in their communities and helping them learn from each other, to race and equity. And finally, we a lot of our work is long-term transformational change, work that spans a number of years, and helps communities build coalitions and do long-term change work. So that's just a sense of a little bit about us. I'll just say, over the years, in this next slide, we have covered almost every topic that I can think of. In the next slide, it's like, from schools, lead poisoning, like I said, HIV, prevention, mental health, alcohol distribution, government efficiency, education funding. The issues that we work in come to us with requests, and then we try and help folks navigate what it is that they're working on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting us into some of these conversations about, how do we stick with tough conversations? What does it mean to live in this hyper-partisan world that we're in, and navigate that with transparency, with authenticity, with some ethics and legitimacy, which is really difficult. And there's been a lot that's been made of our bubbles. We are living more in places where the people around us are similar to us in politics. Our social circles are becoming more narrow around our own politics. And so in this next slide, this was a study that was done in 2017, but you can see they really kind of were trying to get a sense of who are all these tribes, who are all these groupings in the United States in terms of politics, our landscape. And I think the exhausted majority is certainly one of the phrases that I resonated with. There's a lot of folks who are not on the wings and embattled. But there are folks who are just trying to figure out, like, how do we navigate this public life together, and maybe are a little more interested and able to have these conversations and build bridges. I want to, start with anticipating tough conversations. The hardest ones to be a part of are those flyby conversations, where you're suddenly in a conversation about something that's very dear to you, and you're in that conversation with someone else who feels very differently than you do. The flyby conversations for me are the hardest. And so I do have to think about, how am I going to plan for that? How am I going to be prepared? What are the things I need to do, like breathe, to be able to stick with it, to sort of go, oh, we're in this conversation now. Okay, am I going to stick with it? Are we going to reschedule? Am I going to get out of it? So it's really thinking about framing, like, how can we have more formal and friendly opportunities to bring people together across a difference, so that there is time to prepare and really think mindfully about that process. Thinking about where is a good place to schedule or plan for deeper conversation, people you work with, local communities where ties are stronger, people in your family, and not, at the dinner table when everyone's already had a couple of beers or glasses of wine, but sort of like, how do you get a few people together, to have those conversations? Asking people first what's important to you, and thinking about the invitations, thinking about the environment that you're in, And really recognizing that it does take practice. It takes thinking in advance. What's a personal story that I have that's related to this topic that I really care about? What's a personal story that I have that informs why I care about how taxes are structured? So it's those kinds of things can help people prepare a little bit. One of our sort of quotes that we use a lot, Jonathan Haidt wrote the book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And I just thought this was such a short and true sentence for me, that the only cure for bias is other people, that we have to be able to interact with people who are different from us. And that if we don't have that chance to interact, then our own views aren't challenged. We're less informed about people who feel differently than we do. And we have a harder time staying in those conversations. No. So Carrie's just joined us, and she's actually going to stand with me because another tech issue has come up. So we're going to be together and kind of move in and out of the screen. But I'm going to just finish my thought, and then Carrie can introduce herself, and we'll keep going. So one of the things that we're going to share as we go along is some of these resources are coming from our friends at Essential Partners. They've been around for a very long time. Many of the folks at Essential Partners used to be part of the Public Conversations Project. And that group was founded in one of their kind of main founders, studied family, disagreements. And so they're really talking about disagreements among people who care about each other. And so some of their work is informed in that way. So I'm going to let Carrie introduce herself and cover a few of these next slides, and then we'll keep rolling. So you ready?
I'm ready.
You can run.
Okay. Morning, everyone. It's good to see you. My name is Carrie Portrie. I'm one of the program managers with New Hampshire Listens. I was stuck in some school traffic and then unable to get on the internet. So I'm here in Michelle's office. We're going to share some space together today. So we're really excited to share information about challenging conversations. And we want to, why is it so difficult? And especially right now, it feels difficult for people as people are kind of in and feeling in, but out of the pandemic. There's a lot of political divide. And so we use politics as a way to express what we really care about, our hopes and our values. Jordan, you can move to the next slide. And our deepest concerns. And with that comes a lot of emotion. We can feel fear. We can feel defensive. We can feel provoked to attack or shut down. And all of those things are things we all feel when we're passionate about something. And so we why bother? Why is it important? And what's at stake to persevere through that? And one thing is our relationships. The people, sometimes even the people we feel most comfortable with, experience some of our most intense emotions. And so we want to make sure that we spend some time thinking about framing and ways of sustaining relationships, whether that be in our personal lives, our work lives, or in public life and in the civic engagements that matter, because we want to make decisions that benefit people in our communities. And that includes talking across major differences. We can go to the next slide. So one thing that we think about in New Hampshire Listens is dialogue, and that's a little different than debate. Debate is, one right answer. It's often combative or finding flaws in other people's arguments or beliefs or thinking. And dialogue's more about sitting together and learning. It's collaborative, looking for solutions. We're finding strengths in each other's points, being open-minded. and seeking new options. And so we really center our work, especially with challenging conversations with challenging topics, on this focus on dialogue, which is some of our colleagues and partners talk about finding common ground is really important.
And one of the things that I'll say about that is sometimes we will, encourage folks to, when you find yourself in an unplanned conversation, is sort of to say, are you open to having a conversation, or would you rather debate? Because I would love to dialogue with you instead of, debating this. And if someone says, I'd rather debate, you can say, okay, well, maybe I'm out. But just sort of clarifying it is a nice kind of on the front end thing that you can do.
Yeah, and we have a question kind of in that vein already from Carol, and she's asking, so given the challenge to expand our bubbles, could you have some examples, like what kind of successes has New Hampshire Listens had in expanding participation at various events and conversations? How do you get those people in the room together?
That's a great question. I think some of the ones that we've had success with build on an organization or a cohort that already exists, is tied to something very local that people care about, like a school. We did a statewide project with with people who had all gone through Leadership New Hampshire, for example. And so it matters where people are feel connected, and inviting folks into that. It's definitely the invitation and getting folks in the room or on the virtual screen is at least half, if not more, of the work. Once you get people together, you have opportunities to make things happen. And you can create that space, but really getting folks to join you is the tough part. In the last 4 or 5 years, there have been a lot of calls for people of different politics to talk to each other, for example. And often what happens is the left-leaning folks show up and the right-leaning folks don't. And so it can end up feeling like a little more of an echo chamber. We did a project with Urban Rural Action, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. And one of the things that I thought was compelling about that wasn't so much show up and talk to someone who feels differently than you, but it was sort of acknowledging the fact that we all have people in our lives who have different politics or feel differently about something that we feel strongly about. Come together and practice hearing, practice asking good questions, practice thinking about your own view so that you're ready when you're in those conversations. And that actually felt like it brought more of a mix together, because that's that common experience of wanting to be able to be better in those hard conversations.
And I would add, recently the Carsey School in New Hampshire Listens worked for the Commission to Study School Funding. And Michelle's right. A lot of it is the work in the beginning to really pull together different groups. So, excuse me, the strategy was, we pulled together certain focus groups that had different, definitely across the political divide. And then by the time we were having like community conversations, there was a mix. So there were people who believed all different things about school funding. So we had people who were thinking about voucher systems. This is back in January, thinking about, public school funding in terms of, wealthier towns versus not so wealthy towns in terms of tax property wealth. And so we ended up bringing together quite a robust mix of political beliefs and lived experiences, I think, in those conversations. But it took a lot of planning and a lot of list making and networking in order to get that mix of people. So can't underestimate that part of bringing people together as well. There's many different ways of getting started and bringing people together.
Is it me? Okay. All right. So how to get started? Are you ready? Are the other people ready? What are some things that you can ask yourself? So why do you want to connect? What do you want to learn? One of the things about sort of asking yourself that first question is often we want to connect with someone to change their mind. And that we really have to step back from that goal at least a little bit and realize like increasing understanding might help shift something. Often we're sort of locked into our views. And if we can focus on understanding instead of changing someone's mind in a dialogue process, that's the kind of thing where, shifts in view, shifts in understanding, at least humanizing the other and de-escalating that sense of the other person being the enemy. So those are important things to think about. Are you ready to resist the pull to get angry and frustrated? That takes a lot of personal work. And it's sort of, how do you create that space to be ready for, those feelings coming up and being able to sort of breathe through them or ask a question or take a break, doing what you can to understand someone else rather than sort of feeling like it's going back into debate mode. I'll just give an example right now that is a personal one. My brother wrote me an email, and it's been in probably, I don't know, about 9 months ago. And he was asking me about what I thought about some of the police community, the shootings that we've had over the last couple of years, especially George Floyd. And it took me about a week and a half to answer him. And because I really wanted to give a thoughtful response, we vote differently. And so I wrote a thoughtful email, but then I knew I was going to see him soon. And I just said, I'm coming to see you. Let's not continue this on email, but let's plan to take a walk and talk about this more when we're in person. And so I made that initial agreement and, to say, I don't want to keep doing this back and forth. It's not my best mode. And I really wanted to have that conversation face to face. So that's an example of sort of saying what I hoped for the conversation and what I hoped that we would do in order to keep having it. And knowing that the conversation was coming up, I started thinking about how did I want it to go? What did I think I was going to feel? And I started practicing a few things that I wanted to say.
So I'm part of, Michelle's story is about a personal conversation that she was getting ready for, like naming kind of her own needs in terms of the conversation, still wanting to connect, and preparing herself kind of mentally for having that space, because our emotions are our emotions. They're going to come up and we can't deny that. And so we have to kind of have some agreements with ourselves and with each other about how we want to move into the conversation. And so with New Hampshire Listens, often when we're preparing for conversations, whether they be about public policy issues or they're about learning together, about say childhood lead poisoning, about educational or racial equity in schools, whether it's a learning exchange or it's a group community conversation, we have agreements. So you can see on the screen, we have two different versions. So being fully present and trying not to multitask. A big part of that is making sure that you're attending to the people that you're with. Knowing that the conversation is going to be messy or feel messy to people, it's going to be uncomfortable. We can't guarantee safe space when we're addressing really challenging, politically charged topics that affect all of us in some way. being open to other perspectives and sharing airtime, using respectful language. Those are the ones on the left. Those are more of like learning group agreements when people are learning together. On the right are more group agreements. So thinking of a public meeting or a public community conversation is setting up the space to make it productive. So, we all share the responsibility for making our time together productive. Speak up if the process doesn't seem fair. And that's where, for us with New Hampshire Listens, we have trained facilitators and we offer facilitator training because that takes practice. It takes practice to be the person that people are speaking up to and saying, this isn't fair right now. I need you to help out, and to frame these agreements to help people ask curious questions if they're disagreeing, and for yourself to be able to reframe what people are saying in a question to keep the conversation going, especially when it gets really challenging. Questions can kind of help reframe and maybe de-escalate some emotions to move forward. So this is all about how you agree to talk with one another. So this is in this slide again, it says, shows like, it's going to help me bring my best self when we can agree to do 3 simple things. So this is a very simple example that I think could be used, in that interpersonal work with people, the workplace, or in these public conversations, is to share airtime, speak for ourselves, and respect each other's differences, because we are different and we hold the differences. So it's important to do that.
I want to give 2 examples that have come up. So sometimes if you're in a group and you're facilitating, different things come up than if you're an individual, in a conversation with someone else. So one of the times I was facilitating a group, and someone came in a little bit late and stood for a long time, and everyone else was seated. And eventually, I said, do you want to participate? Do you want to take a seat? They had started talking, and they said, no, I don't want to sit down. And I said, then is it your back? Or, I was just trying to, check in, because eventually I either said, well, we all need to stand up in our circle, or we all need to sit down. Otherwise it's a weird dynamic. And we can observe. So that's more of a physical dynamic in a space. Another example is when folks say things and you're asking people in that moment. Dismissing someone else's view can be done in a very nuanced and subtle way. It can just be done with an eye roll. But it's also one of the most sort of destructive things. It takes things off track really quickly when you feel dismissed. So being able to be aware of your own inclination with body, language, to roll your eyes or whatever, kind of, wipe it away. And also kind of reading someone else and saying, let's slow down a little bit, because it's not going to help if we're dismissing each other's views before we even understand what we're talking about. So those kinds of phrases can help. It's good to have some phrases in your back pocket that help you when the temperature kind of rises quickly. Let's take a break. There's a lot to unpack there. Can we slow down and go back to what we're hoping to do today? It feels like we're starting to debate again. I want us to leave this conversation with a better understanding, and I do want to hear you. Those kinds of things can help in the moment. I'll just say a little bit about extending the invitation. This example on the screen is, again, more of a personal invitation. I really want to be able to talk about this with you. Do you think we can have an honest conversation? Can we try and hang in there? Those kinds of things are great interpersonally. But we have a lot of people who are working with each other and have stopped talking to each other, stopped having the tough conversations because again, whether it's politics or really hot button issues, or having heard someone express a view that you're shocked about. And so then you just back out. So that impacts your work environment. We know it's impacting families and friends, and then also communities. One of the things that happens for us is that we'll get calls and someone will share, we had this happen at school, or we had this happen, at a town council meeting, and then it blew up on Facebook, and now neighbors aren't talking with each other. So the intervention of, and the role and dynamic that social media can play when people aren't together, how do you then bring people together to intentionally heal from and disrupt the back and forth on social media in ways that can be helpful? Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yes, and an example I was thinking of in terms of, public challenges, like I think about, there's a long-standing issue of early childhood lead poisoning. We did a coalition building coalition building project a couple of years ago. And it's such a complex issue. And, we brought together pretty different groups of people who hadn't necessarily always talked together, but always working on early childhood lead poisoning, or had experienced having children who are suffering from lead poisoning. And so a lot of emotions there, people wanting children to be healthy and build a system that allows that to happen. Knowing that our buildings are old in New Hampshire and landlords are challenged with renovations and the paperwork of that, and families needing to find affordable properties. And oftentimes in our state, that's hard to do in a lead-free space because our buildings are so old and our houses are so old. And I think I remember sitting in the bottom of a city hall with a group of people, and they were local officials, local elected officials. There was a lawyer there who's also a community person. And then there was some people watching as we all talked about this project. And I just remember thinking, kind of in my mind, let's hang in there with this conversation, because one person said, well, we should pass an ordinance that says you have to repair your home if you're a landlord and you find lead. And then the landlords are saying, but that's going to up the cost of the rents, and people around here can't afford them. And so it was a very challenging space to sit in, because there are many conflicting, legitimate arguments about people's livelihoods. So it's just another example.
All right. So once you've agreed that you're going to do something for a conversation, whether it's a personal one or a work or a community, it's really important to think about some of the questions that you want to ask, and to do that in advance. If it's a community conversation, a group of people works on those together, and whoever's hosting the event, and really thinks what is at the heart of what we want to talk about, what's most important to talk about, what would be a diversion, what do we want to really not talk about, not so much in terms of censoring, but it won't help us get to the problem. And a group of people with different views helps sort of determine that. And certainly these examples can be used really in all of those circumstances. What's at the heart of your beliefs about this issue or politically? What hopes, concerns, and values do you have that underlie your beliefs? What is in your life experience that's led you to believe the things you do? And even some of the most, sort of angry or frustrated, folks in a pretty debate fighting mode can be compelled to talk about these kinds of questions, because you're acknowledging there's a reason they care. There's a reason they're upset. There's a reason this really hits a nerve, and you're asking for them to tell you about it. And so curious questions, good questions, being careful with those leading questions. We always talk about, I do this work for a living, but my family is one of the hardest groups for me to talk with. And my sister, at one point I said, don't you think that's the stupidest thing you've ever said? So that's not a great, curious question. It's not a good question. It did not lead to good things. So really, being mindful, it's easy to ask a manipulative, dismissive, angry question. That one's a pretty obvious one, but you can really be trying and still it leaks out that you are dismissing what someone's viewing. So preparing in advance with your questions is really, really important. And we think is actually a skill to use in lots of different ways. One of the other things, and I said just a moment ago about some of the tools that you can use in terms of getting back on track. If it feels like, oh, this isn't going well, we're not communicating well, we're getting sidetracked, and that happens. That happens. We've all been there. How do we pause in that moment? What kind of things do we need to do? Do I need to slow down? Am I really listening? Am I only listening to find fault, or am I really trying to understand? When you hear someone and it doesn't make any sense to me, I disagree with it. What have I heard? What am I trying to understand? And so checking with people, let me make sure I understand what you mean. Are you saying that this is important to you because, is that right? It's good to do that checking in, and we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies on that and walk through an example in a minute. Like I said, with curious questions, saying to myself, get curious, get curious. Again, it's hard to hold when you're defending yourself, when you're defending a whole group of people, when you're defending something that in your heart is right to defend. Sometimes you can't stay in the conversation, and sometimes it's time to protest and yell and, civil disobedience or whatever. But at some point, talking is always going to have to happen in order to move forward at some point. And so when that moment comes, how do you ask yourself, how do I get curious? How do I help build some bridges with the things that I need to say? And again, something we've said a couple of times now, when do you take a break? When's it good? And I'll say, taking a break, another sort of strategy for me when I was talking with my brother, we went for a walk, and that helped me burn off some of the nervous energy that I had. We were moving along. It was sort of like driving, folks who have kids and teenagers, and the kinds of conversations that happen in the car because you're not looking at each other. Same thing. We were walking, looking ahead, and it helped me burn off nervous energy. And so that, I think, helped us have a much longer conversation than we would have had if we were sitting at the kitchen table and looking at each other. It's also nice to share an appreciation at the end. I know we don't agree on this, but I really appreciate that we were able to have this conversation. And I appreciated that you listened and tried to understand me. And those kinds of things, of course, with my brother, we hugged each other when we were done at work or, other places, people you don't know as well. It's still important to give a little bit of, is there anything positive that happened here, and try and name it. We need that reinforcement right now. We need to find ways to at least name something that we appreciate. Carrie and I were in a big room of people recently. There had been really contentious meetings, yelling, people having to be escorted out by police. And one of the things that we really tried to emphasize and name is that if you are in this room, you care about what is, you care about this. That's something we have in common. People don't come out at night to public meetings unless they care. And so, yes, we're all over the map in terms of how we feel, but let's at least acknowledge that. So naming those things, I think, are really important. This is, so Urban Rural Action is a group that we partnered with this past year. This was the group that I said people were motivated to participate so that they could practice. And they have just a very simple model, ABCs for responding in challenging conversations. This is the thing that you all can practice. It's something I practice still, especially if I know if a conversation is coming up. I say things out loud to myself in the car. I say things out loud to my dog, Pluto, when we're walking. Practice really helps. If you hear the words coming out of your mouth and you don't like them, you can change them. If you hear them coming out of your mouth and you're like, yeah, that feels good. That feels like I said it the way I want to. It helps. So the first is back to the questions, asking questions to understand someone else's perspective. Someone is, even if it's a flyby, someone else has just kind of hit you or something and you're like, what? Giving yourself a moment and think, all right, what can I ask? Can I ask you a question about, what you care about around this? Yes. And then really trying to come up with that curious question. And listening, then listening to the answer, not interrupting, really trying to just not anticipate what you're going to say next, but really, really deeply listening. And we're not great at that. We're not great at that. I have to say, be present, because if I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say next, a lot of us do that. And then breaking down our own view so they understand our reasoning. So I feel really differently. And I think it's because, so I'll give you an example. I actually, there was a conversation that we hosted where they were trying to figure out what to do with a piece of land in a small community. And a lot of kids and parents came out with their like soccer jerseys because they wanted athletic fields. And this core group of, it happened to be this, feels stereotypical, but there was a group of older men in flannel shirts and they wanted a gun range, in this land. And so I overheard a woman ask the question, I have 1,000 objections, but I really want to know, like, what would that look like? What do you think about when you think about the safety things involved? And so this person had a chance in that group to really answer. And then, she said, I think part of my reason for being against it that I want you to understand is that this is an area of town where kids are all over the place. And I can't imagine, I just can't see it working. And I appreciate you trying to explain it to me, but I just don't understand how it could ever be safe. But then she checked her understanding. She said, but it sounds like you're comfortable. You've had guns in your life, you own guns, you're comfortable with guns, and that you think it's possible. And I think that's where, we disagree, but it does sound like you think it's possible. So, you can go on, but I think it's ABC, ask questions, break down our own view, and check our understanding of their perspective. And that's just an approach that I really like the simplicity of it, and kind of saying to myself, all right, ABCs, what can I do in this moment? This is, do you want to do this one? dialogue and debate. Okay. So this is really sort of another take on moving from a debate mode into a dialogue mode. Again, you might be in a conversation, it goes back and forth. And so being able to recognize when we've started to think win lose about it, when we're starting to antagonize or be antagonized or be interrogated or feel trapped or trap someone else, in something that they said, those, yeah, but you said earlier, sometimes that's not the best way to go. So, paying attention to how your mindset going into the conversation can help. Some of that needs to be part of the invitation. Again, in the middle of that conversation, the ABCs are on the right of the screen. On the left side of the screen, it's more of those traps that you get into when you start to feel defensive and you start feeling like you've got to fight. So recognizing when your mindset has shifted, and then paying attention to the results. I have absolutely been in conversations where the divide got deeper, where I felt like I damaged the relationship. And even though I might have felt like I really, said something snappy and smart and, that someone couldn't say anything back to, we haven't made any kind of deeper understanding. And we're further apart than we were at the beginning. A lot of us have had that experience. And so focusing on, again, back to why are we having this conversation? What can we have as an understanding? Can we maintain our relationship? And I'll go back to family on this one, but I think it applies with neighbors. It applies at work. I'll do neighbors. There's a neighbor sort of around the corner from me who I don't know well, and but we've had sort of attempts at conversations before, and but I haven't spent a lot of time developing that relationship. There's another neighbor who we've spent a lot of time together. We feel very differently about some things, and that's someone I know I will invest some time in. I'll be mindful about figuring out how we can keep talking to each other, because I know it's good for me ultimately to have a better sense of that. And I don't want to have that really strained sense of neighbors with that person. So I've made some choices. There is one person I'm probably not going to talk a lot to, but there's someone else I am going to invest in. And it's okay to do that. We do that in our families too. I never see Uncle Joe, but I see, Aunt May regularly. And so I'm going to invest a little more in Aunt May. So this last piece, and I'll just say there's a lot of different views about what it means to be civil. What it means to have a civil conversation, using the word civility. There's baggage with that. Sometimes it means we can only be polite. We can't show emotion. You're going to tone police what I say. We have to be able to allow emotion and allow passion. Short of someone sticking their finger in your face and yelling at the top of their lungs, there's got to be a way to have some passion in the conversation. And how we've been raised, impacts how we feel about that. So I was raised in the South. I had a very conflict-averse dad. And so, being uncomfortable with anger, being uncomfortable with tears, recognize like, what's my thing that based on how I grew up might be overreacting. Like maybe I see anger and it's not directed at me, it's passion. Mm-hmm. And so just, noticing that. I remember the first time I went to a friend's house, and they were just, bickering around the table. And I was like, should I leave? Like, is this okay? What's happening? And she's like, no, this is how it always is. It's fine. And so just recognizing how you are formed. Safety and courage in the context of civil discourse. There's a lot of conversation about safe space and brave space and calling people out and calling people in. There's all this language. Again, it just helps to talk about it and to have clarity on the kind of space that you're creating. I've mentioned emotions. The last thing, and we're actually going to do, Carsey's going to do a longer program on this later in the year, but at what point do you stop talking and you protest, or you vote differently, or you perform some kind of civil disobedience, or you stand up with a sign and you're silent, but you're a presence. There's all kinds of things that people do, and those are good mindful decisions. So pay attention of when you need to be in a conversation and when you need to step back and show how you feel about something feeling wrong to you.
Mm-hmm.
Chime in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say power dynamics are really key when you're thinking about holding challenging conversations. So if you step back into, say, you're a public servant, or in your job, you gather people in communities as facilitators, that being aware of the power dynamics is huge. And that, like what Michele says, people's comfort with different types of emotions. In my house, it was about kind of, it's okay to be emotional at home, but keep it together in public. No matter what, you're going to persevere through the challenge. So you better figure out how you're going to do that. It came from my parents are military brats, and I think that's part of the reason why you just keep going. And so I think that's like, when you think about safety and courage, it's different for people. And the safety and courage, definitely as facilitators or people holding groups, deciding like, what size is that group going to be? Is it going to start small and then get bigger? Is it going to be more lucrative or more productive for you to start in small groups? Do you start with kind of an affinity-based group, like where you have people on two different sides of an issue talk in their own spaces and then bring people together? There's so many different strategies and conversations to have with people you're planning with and your community partners to decide like what is going to make a space where you're intentionally bringing people together to talk about a very challenging issue in their schools and their community. And we can't say enough, like that planning time and that partnering time and the design time to figure out what may work is really, really important. Because then if you have that structure and even that simplicity of the ABCs, you can make room for the emotions in the room. You're ready for them. And it doesn't make it so it has to be this very like superficially quiet, polite space that I think sometimes people can fear, because they want to like really get into what they want to talk about. It's their life. So I would just say like power dynamics, design and planning, really important.
And we are going to skip to the last slide and just open it up for questions. We've been talking at you for a little bit. But Jordan, what you got?
Wonderful. So folks can feel free to send direct messages to me in chat, and I will ask questions. So if you have more, please bring them up. The first thing I wanted to ask is, when you talk about slowing down, listening, it at once sounds so simple, and yet kind of like the way that the world is constructed, it's a little bit radical. How do you find kind of that balance between a world that is constantly saying do more, and sort of the fact that conversations and dialogue are inherently something that don't happen immediately? They don't happen at the speed of, the internet or social media all the time necessarily.
Yeah. Though I'm going to answer this in terms of a work piece, because we just had an example. for example, in healthcare, I have a friend who's a pediatrician, and she said, we now are supposed to keep our visits to like 20 minutes. And she said, I'm not the best doctor I can be when I have to do this in 20 minutes. And there's probably some things that 20 minutes is fine, right? But knowing strategically when are those moments when, yep, this is gonna take longer, and I've got to invest in this longer conversation. When does your staff need to move from a transactional, tasky logistics conversation to we're actually gonna sit for a little bit. We've had some things happen, and we need to, let's slow down. And you can use some strategies like, take a few minutes and write down a few thoughts about how you feel about the reorganization that's happening in our company or in our school or whatever. And then giving people a chance to talk after having some reflection time. So there are strategies that you can use in work environments like that. I think for the one-on-one, I think for me, the recognizing how it works, then it was kind of a virtuous cycle. Recognizing that, I slowed down and breathed on that one, and that conversation went so much better. Makes it easier to do it the next time. In terms of that cultural push, back to wine at the dinner table, though. If we're all sitting around and everybody's rowdy, and then somebody says something and I try and start yelling across the table, that I can't even pause there. I think that is more like get out and come back later, for me anyway.
Well, and I'll just chime in and say, I was in a meeting the other day with a colleague where we're preparing to work with some teachers to hold conversations and their school. And we were talking, our meeting was 45 minutes or so. And we spent about 30 minutes talking to each other about our lives, where we're at, how we thought about the situation, what we thought we should do. And then 15 minutes actually productively writing something down and lining out what we were going to do. And we could have started the opposite way. And we were joking at the end, we're like, it only took us 30 minutes of talking back and forth before we actually could write something down. But I think that's that's a slowing down example in some ways. We were like, great, let's connect here. We haven't seen each other in a while. It's been a whole summer. And so we connected, talked back and forth, talked about the community and the issues we knew about. And then we were like, all right, what are we going to do? Or what do we need to write down? And so that feels like a balance between tasking and logistics, which I think people are really can get bogged down in, because that's a lot of those visual productive things, reports, numbers, things you can show people. The internet, right? We click something and it gives us an answer. It can be hard to be oh, wait, that conversation that didn't visibly show anything to anyone really mattered in terms of our planning and productivity and supporting this school.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. We have another question from Linda. Can you talk about facilitating in person versus online? I know you've had a lot of experience doing both, over the pandemic. Have you facilitated online difficult conversations, and what were the differences that you noticed between the two styles?
Yeah, before the pandemic, we were, we valued the online tools, but they were supplemental, and so we really had to, learn a little more and make that shift and bring some of the tools that we use in person to that online space. But there are real positives, and so now I think we will always, sort of have a conversation with our partners and the communities and say, okay, what would be the benefits of doing this online? What would be the benefits of doing it in person? And there are some great online strategies, and we cover some of those in our facilitating online trainings. But I found that one of the things that we would ask folks is, I know, that there are some things you can lurk on. Like right now, you can easily kind of lurk and listen in the background to what we're doing today, which is great. Folks need to be able to do that. So this was a pretty easy lurker. If we were asking you to join a conversation to share as a family how you feel about students returning to the classroom, or and it's a focus group of 8 people, we need you present. We would do some things to ask folks, this is a please prioritize being on camera for small groups. We understand if you can't, let us know you're there. Try and be in a quiet space. A lot of times people say keep your camera muted, but if we're a small group, we'll say try and get in a quiet place and unmute, because it's nice to be able to hear people say yeah, or laugh a little. Otherwise it feels so sterile. So I think we're getting better at sort of thinking, when do we do it in person when we can? And when you can't, I really think when it's not a choice, like in the pandemic, there are strategies to make that space really, really productive. And we were actually thrilled with how we were able to create spaces, give people breaks, give people a chance to reflect on their own, share thoughts in chat, talk to each other, receive information, just kind of keeping the mode changing while you're online.
Mm-hmm.
In person, there's nothing like in person, especially when you are trying to bring a community of people together who don't always see each other. So if we were doing something just with a leadership team of a school, being online isn't going to really, you've got relationships there already. It's okay. If you're trying to bring, teachers and students and community members and administrators together to have a conversation, if it's possible, in person, it should really be prioritized for lots of reasons.
I was also thinking about, like, during the pandemic, we did a school safety conversation. I think there was like 100 people there or so, or there was a lot of people there. And Michelle did a lot of planning with the city school district that was hosting the event. And there were interpreters or translators, and there was a lot of preparation for that. And that, because of the immense amount of preparation and the internal facilitation they had, and then we brought in, New Hampshire Listens facilitators, it worked really well online. But then there's other situations. I'm thinking of another situation recently where we have translation in smaller groups. So this is like 10 people, and it's really important we're there in person. It's really important that we're with this small group, meeting with them, listening to their stories about health and healthcare during the pandemic in general.
Earning trust.
And earning trust and being there presently, and also with the translation there. So, and that was in conversation with our partners. So in one case, with the pandemic, it had to be online, a lot of preparation. And then in this, like right now, we're in this in-between space, it feels like in some ways. It was really important to be in person. So that's another way we decide as well. That was hopefully answer.
Yeah, thank you. So we are getting towards the end of our time. So I'm just going to give one last question here that we have. And it's interesting because it's something that a few people have noted, actually. From Yulia, says, how do you manage the gender differences for how people interact in a group dynamic? And she says, I see most of the attendants today are female. Seems to suggest that women are more interested in conversation. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are seeing It's fascinating, the patterns that we are seeing in a lot of different ways, even in schools. And I won't so much analyze why the pattern is there, but I'll say when people are together, noting the identities of the people in the room and just kind of anticipating what dynamics might be there matters. So it might be gender, it might be position, like if a superintendent or a chief of police is part of a group. It might be race, it might be age. Sometimes when young people are parts of groups, all the adults turn to them and they're like, what do you think? And sometimes they ignore the young person. So it's like, the pendulum can swing lots of different ways. I guess I'm not sure I have time to give a social analysis of participation by gender, but we are seeing those patterns in a lot of ways, and we're seeing them.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to just see. I see lots of familiar names, and we could talk for a long time about this. But it's great to have you all here. It's a tough time for lots of reasons, and the more people who are just thinking proactively about how to stay in these kinds of conversations and help them be as productive as possible, it will help. Little things matter along the way, for sure. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you both. Thank you all for being here today at Coffee and Conversations. Our next one will be October 13th. We will be discussing public administration education in polarized times. So sort of a similar topic, but how do you educate people who are going into the field of public management, public administration, public policy? How do you still operate effectively in times when we're very divided? So I think this is a great kickoff to the season. Thank you so much to Michele and Carrie. Really appreciate you as colleagues and people. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Have a good day.